elicits a deadly response. We need to make the change, and the change has got to be in ourselves. So we're going to go to a much, much lighter and more enjoyable topic now. We'll get the show on the road, and let's have some fun. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we're going to talk about jazz, one of my favorite topics, with great trailblazers in their own right. Tim Jackson, Artistic Director of Monterey Jazz Festival, Susan Muscarella, President of California Jazz Conservatory, and Randall Kline, Founder and Executive Artistic Director of SFJAZZ. And a reminder, Zoom attendees, that we would take 3 snap polls during the show and we'll announce results. And your questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining, and you'll have to unmute yourselves in order to participate. I think you're all muted a bit, which is not standard. We cannot have jazz presenters and educators muted at all. We really appreciate you being there. And I'm going to set this up. And we're going to go to you, Tim. Jazz was created by African-American musicians fostered in New Orleans. Jazz drove the music and fashion scene in American urban centers of the 20s and 30s, found its way to Europe in the 30s and 40s, and continues to influence musical styles. Jazz, and this is one of the things that I really find so amazing, it honors and challenges its traditions. It breaks things. Jazz is about in-the-moment performance. So I'll never get a better chance to ask this question. What makes jazz jazz? And if that thing is missing, it's not a jazz performance. I know that you each have had that period where you're listening to a performance and you're thinking, no. Tim, what makes jazz jazz?
Well, I first think of that, that old line of, I know it when I hear it. But I think deeper than that, for me, I think first of pulse in the music, and a forward energy. And I say pulse instead of swing, because to me, jazz is more than just, quarter notes on a ride cymbal. It doesn't, that can be jazz, but it isn't always jazz. So I think more in terms of pulse, which creates forward momentum. That's a key marker for me. I think beyond that, there has to be improvisation. There has to be communication, and the ability to cross-communicate between the artists on the bandstand. And then, I guess thirdly, for me, a certain emotional reaction. To me, all great jazz, or any jazz, has some kind of emotional content to it that I think, as you started out the conversation, Mark, you said something about jazz speaks to your heart, and I think that's probably true for all of us. So I think that's a big part of the music. So those are kind of 3 things that really jump out at me.
And there's a surprise, isn't there, Susan? Right? There's a surprise element where you're moving along, and all of a sudden you're surprised by something, and then you take a different stream, and then you're surprised again. It seems like jazz, as you see these pieces unfold, surprise is a big element.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that one of the most important elements for me in this style of music is the element of improvisation. And improvisation could be thought of as spontaneous composition. I like to think of it as indeterminate, and that, just as you described, Mark, that you're never really sure from one moment to the next what will happen. But I loved your description of jazz where you used a couple of terms, grammar and structure, which I think are really perfect for jazz because it's a style of music with a language all its own. And it's no different from how we talk with one another in a spontaneous way. We really, for this particular program, for example, didn't rehearse yesterday. The four of us did not rehearse yesterday what we were planning on saying, but yet we're able to improvise and communicate through words. But with jazz, of course, we've got rhythm, melody, and harmony, to deal with. And most of us, of course, all of us really have had more experience with communicating with words than notes. But when you think about music in general, what is the one style of music that has the requisite of improvisation? It's the one thing that for me, if there's no improvisation, then for me, it is not jazz.
So Randall, what's your answer? What is the thing? What is the thing that got you into jazz?
Yeah, it's a very hard thing to pinpoint. I mean, you talked about surprise. There's, this famous quote by, one of the greatest of jazz writers, Whitney Balliet, calls, jazz is the sound of surprise. To your point about surprise, and it's to Susan's point about improvisation, and to your earlier point also about just the history of the music. I mean, to me, the sound of surprise is always, for me, around improvisation. I mean, it's great to hear a through composed piece, and it has elements, these things we want to know, but there's elements of the blues in it. There's some pain, there's some suffering, there's some toil that people had to go through, and I just feel like that's a human quality. I'm not sure that's what you get, exclusively through jazz, but this feeling of humanity that's kind of embedded in the music. But lots of folk musics have that. I mean, so as a presenter, SFJAZZ has always been to a lot of world music and blues, and a lot of those musics have similar qualities. And Tim's point about rhythm, I think, is also a huge part of it. There's a pulse. We have a pulse, and so jazz, very hard to define, but I think if there's one thing, it's a sense of, call it rhythm or swing, and the sense of improvisation and the sound of surprise via
the blues scale, right? And that combination of minor and major keys, right? The whole idea of moving in different directions.
Yeah, and communicating, call and response. These are old things. There's a performer, Rhiannon Giddens, who's performed, for a lot of festivals, and she's not, necessarily a jazz performer, but she's a great jazz singer and interprets stuff, and a lot of music. But she came to prominence as finding the African roots of in bluegrass music, basically, in American folk music. And there you get to try, these roots are convoluted. What we think of a blues scale is originating, these pentatonic scales originating out of Africa, and that's how, this is what. But her husband's a musicologist, an Italian musicologist, and one of her most recent records is called "There Is No Other," and that record sort of traces the blues scale back to the Islamic slave trade, actually pre West African, and how they get it. And so that the scale, comes from Islamic culture, and originally. And so this is kind of, jazz is one expression of this kind of human, the sort of humanity of what we are. And jazz, again, I think Tim, the famous quote, when you hear it, it moves you in some way. But there are lots of musics that move you in a particular way. The one defining element is definitely improvisation.
You're making such an amazing point with this sort of international roots of jazz, because jazz has now become such an international form. I hear within jazz sometimes riffs that come straight out of the music of India, of the continent of India, of Bollywood popular music. I hear music that comes out of the Middle East. I hear music that comes out of Africa. I hear music that comes out of the United States. Susan, when you're training artists, where do the artists come from? The younger artists that are coming in, what is their perspective now? Are they coming out of this traditional jazz and blues world into your schools with that sensibility, or are they coming from a cross-fertilized, internet-informed, streaming music accessible perspective, where they're taking what they hear and fusing it into their art.
Well, I think one thing that's important to note is that jazz is a very democratic art form and very inclusive. And it really allows for everyone to participate in an equal way. I think that's important to note. But one thing that I thought was of utmost importance when I founded the school in 1997 was that we offered a school for the study and performance of jazz and related styles of music. So just as you were saying, Mark, it's, I wouldn't, I know that jazz has come from New Orleans and has a specific, rhythmic foundation and so on, but that it is very inclusive and it includes a lot of, international styles and influences. And so, for example, when I started the school, we began as a community music school, and it was always for music study, and it was always for jazz and related styles of music. But we then in 2009 started a degree program for jazz and related styles of music, but that the requirements included not only American jazz, but Afro-Caribbean, South American, Indian influences. So we tried to cover all the bases. And one thing that was important to me in that regard was that the term world music came about. You probably remember, I don't know how many years ago that was, but everybody was batting around that term world music, and that never really worked for me. I was always of the mind that if we were studying Brazilian music, it was from Brazil, or if we were studying Southeastern Indian music, it was from Southeastern India. So that was always really important. So we have 136 credit Bachelor of Music degree in Jazz Studies, and we have requirements in Indian, South American, and Afro-Caribbean music, as well as American jazz.
And Tim, as you're programming, how do you deal with this issue? One of the things that strikes me in the history of jazz, if you look at somebody like Ellington's jazz was informed by European orchestral forms, and there was a tremendous exploration of forms that his parents had been exposed to and that came out of New Orleans, but also an exploration of the music that he encountered in places like New York City. And he deepened and broadened this. So there was a kind of a dialogue and a juxtaposition between he and the Hot Fives, Hot Sevens that came out of New Orleans with Armstrong, but it was different. How do you today take what is going on in the world and present that on your stage in a way that ensures that through line of jazz remains part of the identity of Monterey Jazz Festival?
Well, I also think, with Ellington, his famous line of "there's only two kinds of music, good music and bad music." Yeah. And I think for us in the presenting world, whether it's, in a large festival or, in a smaller venue like Wumba Jazz Center, it's the possibilities. I find these days the possibilities are endless, and that it's a really book right now, and there's some amazing music out there. And as the world gets smaller through technology, artists are absorbing more and more influences into their music. So I think particularly you have to program for your event in your community. I think all of our organizations, whether it's SFJAZZ or the Jazz Conservatory, we all have our communities that we work in, and we first and foremost have to be relevant in our particular communities. and make sure that we're doing good work in our communities. And I think so for a large festival like Monterey, you have to be, it's wise to be very inclusive. And people, I always get a sense that people come to these larger outdoor festivals out of a sense of adventure, and that they have their specific tastes, what they like, what they don't like, but they're generally, I think, open to hearing new things. And I've always said that if you say come to the Monterey Jazz Festival and you like everything that you heard, I'm probably doing something wrong.
So let me ask you and Randall to give your view, because you're programming Kumba, which is a jazz club in Santa Cruz, and then you're also programming Monterey Jazz Festival. Randall has sort of an urban center, kind of a performing arts center that is dedicated to jazz and associated arts. So Tim, starting with you, and then Randall, when you look out at that audience, and you're envisioning that for either the 3-day festival or for Kumba, and Randall, as you're looking out, I'd like to hear how you think about the program, because some people, I love artists who I know, right? But I also love to be surprised. So how do you balance your programs so that you are engaging people in the familiar, but you're also driving awareness of new music, and you're supporting artists who are worthy of support, need that audience awareness? How do you do that? Isn't that, I mean, that's part of the magic, because you don't want to alienate people. You don't want to bore them. Tim, how do you do that? Is it really magic? Do you have like a magician's hat and you pull out,
No, it's not magic. I actually go back to a line, actually, Randall, that you told me years and years ago, or you actually didn't tell me, but it came up in a conversation, and it was, I'm paraphrasing, but we were talking about artistry and artists, and how the musicians are really the artists of this music and the art form. And the folks that are in our role in presenting and producing are really more the craftsmen, where, we've learned certain skills. We've done a lot of study, a lot of work over the years to, and taken very seriously what we do. And, that does give us, I think, certain skill sets to help try and program. And it's also about the relationships that we built with artists over the years. Oftentimes, whether it's Monterey or SFJAZZ, we all have our relationships, specific relationships that allow us to create special programs and special opportunities that can, I won't use the word unique, but give us some special opportunities to present artists in certain ways. But Mark, you kind of answered the question. You said it's all about balance. People do want to come see artists that they know and love, but they're also, if they're into jazz, they are going to be into that sound of surprise, and they want to hear something new.
Randall, I just recently saw a performance by Kevin Moore, Kev Mo, at SFJAZZ. And one of the things that first of all, the ultimate pro, and he's such an amazing artist, but he also educated me from the stage. I was a little kid listening to a storyteller, and I learned. Is that what you're doing in part by what you present?
Yes, it's a complex system, basically. How it all works. Tim is kind of getting at the sort of the crux of it. In essence, we're curators, and as curators, there's a great quote from a guy named Gary Stewart, who was very instrumental in the beginning of programming at Apple Music, and was the sort of driving force between Rhino Records re-releases. And his quote goes something like, curation is not about what you like. And he tries to put yourself in the position of what, Mark, you like, sitting in the Kevmo audience. And you're going to find this, balance. Again, it's Tim's point. It's not just a balance between the different kinds of things you're doing, but it's the balance about how you can find inroads, what's popular, what's considered popular, but what's considered interesting. And so everyone has to develop a point of view about this, of some kind, a distinctive point of view that, and this system, relies heavily on the artists. Obviously, they're the most important part of it and what they offer, but audiences and developing audiences over long term. So, if we have a program called membership, and some people have been members of SFJAZZ, and one of the the primary benefits of being a member is access to tickets, good tickets first, and so they're self-identifying as fans, sort of coming in, we try to incent them to be experimental. And we have one program, it's called Take 10, which is when people buy tickets for a season, and a season may have close to 500 concerts in it. And, how do you decide what you want to go to? But if you buy 10 tickets, you'll get a 10% discount on everything you bought. And, say you buy 9 tickets to Kepmo, might have been one of your concerts, and you're spending a lot of money for a ticket for that. And you've committed to 9 things you love, and you're done. And then you start looking, if I take the show, we have 2 performance spaces. One is called the Joe Henderson Lab, which is a 100-seat room versus the 700-seat room we have. And you see an artist that, that looks interesting. Well, for a $25 ticket, which those prices are lower, you can experiment a little bit. And we try to, find subtle ways other than, giving people information to incent them to be experimental. And it's incredible how successful that actually is. When people get exposed to things they don't know, because there's a gateway you have to go through. You have to pay. And if you're going to pay, you want to make sure you're getting a value. So this is part of the system. You've got to not only keep in mind, artistic integrity and what people like, but, how you develop an audience. And so over, 40 years or, 30 plus years of a membership program, the audience is a little, that more than anything is, provide our point of view. The audience, I hear it a lot from performers, your audiences are different. In other words, we've helped cultivate a particular point of view in our audience, over years. And, that's a long-term thing here. So, you're getting to things, and back to, what jazz is and different influences, it's that's part of what we're trying to define. It's open. Jazz happens to be a word, like lots of things, that's convenient, that you have to categorize something. And, we have a definition, sorry to go, but it's all tied together, and I'm rambling a bit here. But, we present, jazz is at the core of what we present, but we also present music that jazz has influenced, which means a lot of contemporary forms, particularly in classical music, and music that jazz has been influenced by. So that's when you go back to the roots of things. And there's some amazing sort of.
You're creating an educational experience for the audience from the stage, right?
Ideally, yes.
An enjoyable educational
Ideally, nobody
experience.
knows that's happening.
Now, Susan, as an educator, is actually helping to cultivate the artists who will present from your stages, hopefully, going forward. Susan, Randall made a really interesting point, right? The price of admission is a ticket. Money becomes a barrier to experiencing art because these organizations need to sustain themselves, or to becoming educated in that art form. And you have developed a school from the ground up. You rolled up your sleeves and, oh my God, right? I mean, looking at the stories of these organizations, Randall starting off with, an itinerant organization that was just trying to grab some space for the artists to perform and figuring out how to bring an audience together at that time, you trying to create a school out of nothing. How do you actually balance those needs of cultivating artists who are great and also ensuring that you maintain the financial wherewithal to advance this? How does that work?
Well, I mortgaged my house. I really did. I believed in it, so strongly that I thought, well, this is the only way this is going to happen. So that's how we started out. But in all seriousness, getting back to the conversation and following up on what Tim and Randall have said, I really think it's our responsibility to educate both students and audiences. I think it really is our responsibility to give them a broad perspective. And if you think back to when some of the artists who are performing today, who are so well known and loved, when they first started playing, I'm sure people were skeptical. Like, I remember when Bitches Brew came out, and I was very, very young. I thought, oh my gosh, what is this? And now I listen back to Bitches Brew, and it's part of it's in a big piece of the puzzle. And so for example, when we do anything at the school, we try to take that into consideration. It's not so much what Susan likes, it's what, I want to give them a broad perspective. So, and also give them something that they would not be able to get otherwise. Like, for example, in our degree program, we have a social sciences requirement that's 4 semesters, that's non-transferable, that's taught by Smithsonian scholar Dr. Anthony Brown, and it's the history of jazz. It's 12 credits that is a requirement, starting with the African roots of jazz and moving to 2023. And we have different scholars come in and give their opinions and cite examples and so on. So it really gives students the entire picture of the history of the music. And the other thing is a little bit off topic, but one thing that I wanted to make sure to say is that I think that jazz in the Bay Area has been really successful, or as successful as it has been, thanks in huge part to Tim and Randall. But it's also because our organizations don't really compete. They really complement one another. For example, Tim and Randall have a presenting organization with an educational component, and we have an educational organization with a performance component. So putting the 3 of us together really, I think, contributes to the strength that jazz has maintained in our Bay Area.
That was my feeling as an observer of this, that there is an ecosystem that you have developed over decades that creates a center of jazz. If you take a look at how jazz has moved out because it has become unaffordable in certain neighborhoods, particularly in San Francisco, the jazz still thrives in this region because of you. And I think that that's really important for the health of the music ecosystem. So I want to ask you all a really important question. It's about the commercialization, the consolidation in a corporatized form of the music business, where the streamers basically are the gatekeepers to the works of artists. Artists aren't necessarily earning, other than the top artists aren't earning that much from their works. The number of live stages that are open in the ways that yours are open are limited, and it's a real problem for the cultivation of a vibrant art form. What do you all think? And I'll start with you, Tim, go to Susan, and then give a round of the last word. What do you all think in terms of how to best cultivate this musical form, the audiences, create these experiences, these enjoyable events in a way that continues to benefit the artists who are delivering to us these types of experiences? Tim, do you believe that we have a threat of the corporatization of music, or do you think that it's just part and parcel of the ecosystem that always exists and there's always going to be a dialogue and it's just will find its own balance?
I think there's definitely turmoil right now. There's a lot of change going on. The music delivery systems have really changed over the years, and certainly over my career. I worry that it becomes harder for artists to make a living, particularly with their recorded music. And I think that puts additional responsibility on the presenters and producers, particularly for folks like Randall and myself, that we play such an important role in the financial ecosystem, I think, for jazz musicians now, because I think for a lot of musicians, touring and performing is a major source of income. So I think that it fuels my fire in the sense that I feel that responsibility for the organizations that I'm involved with and for the field in general, and that it's really important that we have strength and can develop and nurture the performing spaces that we have.
Susan, what do you think about this question of developing artists and finding a way to remove financial barriers to artists who have the talent but perhaps don't have the money? How do you feel about that?
Well, we make every effort to contribute, to their being able to do their work, become artists. Our tagline is in a musician and out an artist. For example, we have one sponsor right now who is the founder of Jam Bar, the organic artisan energy bar, Jennifer Maxwell. She was the founder of Power Bar. And she has been critical to our success in the last, especially in the last 5 years. And then, of course, when COVID hit, that really had a negative impact on everybody, including us. But Jennifer Maxwell is a jazz drummer, and she's been playing in the jazz school, the community music program, for many, many years. And I've gotten to know her over the years, and she has an appreciation for the art form, for the time that is invested in becoming an artist, for featuring artists of note. For example, we have now a series that that it's titled Jam Bar Presents, and she's enabled us to present big names like Joe Lovano. This coming weekend, we have Mike Stern. We've had access to these artists thanks to her, and what we're able to do is to give our students and our audiences an experience that we would otherwise not be able to give them, given the size of our venue. For example, we're not a Monterey Jazz Festival or an SFJAZZ, and that was actually by design. I was interested in a 100-seat 1940s intimate jazz club. So, but that's very prohibitive. I mean, how could we pay? We couldn't really afford a Joe Lovano or a Mike Stern or we had Dave Liebman a couple weeks ago, and so on. So you've probably seen the ads for that concert series. So what I feel proud of is that she's enabled us to bring something to the Bay Area, at least to our own students and our own audiences, that we would not otherwise be able to do. And I'm very grateful to her for that.
Well, and you get the world that you invest in, right? The return on investment, what you're saying is the return on investment here is jazz. It's great music. Randall, I remember when I worked for you, doing that search for your development head. You and I sat in your office. You don't remember this conversation, I'm sure. And we were talking about how you approach a donor who does not play an instrument and may only go to concerts and performances rarely, and you talked about the fact that that investment is going to get that person something that their other investments will not. That will be music, right? That will be jazz.
Mhm,
And that's what Susan's talking about.
mhm.
How do you cultivate that future in a way? Because we're buying our future. If we don't buy music, we won't have music. It's really that simple, right?
Yeah, well, we're back to the ecosystem here. The complexity of the ecosystem, and the thing that works, that doesn't work for anybody here, in this ecosystem. Without artists, it doesn't work. And this happens to be both the most challenging time for distribution models, as Tim's referring to, but it also is, and in the last 10 plus years has been a kind of a beautiful, brave new world of artists being able to talk directly to their audiences via,
Yes.
initially through YouTube. I've run across artists, again, the artist wants to be an artist. They don't need to be their own promoter. And, that's a difficult role to play, both. However, people have a chance to talk via these social media platforms to audiences that they've never had direct access to. And I know people who've made good livings from this and have been savvy about it and know the same game that Tim and I play to try to get audiences in, to get people to watch their YouTube channel or to do that. And so artists now can sell records. Bandcamp is another great example of something where artists sell their self-produced records through. And, that distribution channel was something that was not there. And this is, worldwide. And, so this long tailish thing that the internet promised us for jazz and a niche form, can still be harnessed. It's challenging. It's out there. But, you said something earlier, Mark, about, organizations need revenue to be there. But the key thing is artists need revenue for us to need revenue.
That's exactly right. Artists need to make a living in order for us to have access to their art. We ought to give greater appreciation to that fact. That is the one indelible. And I want to share with you two of our three polls. 100% of the respondents, when we asked what is the best experience of music, 100% said no doubt. Live performance. Live performance is the preferred way. It gives us people the most joy. So if we're going to have the most joy, let's give the most access to live performance. And then the other poll, which is just amazing, we said, what do you think is the biggest barrier today for jazz to thrive as an art form? And it's really lack of musical education and exposure. It goes to Susan's work, Tim's work, Randall's work, all of you being able to create that exposure and create that enjoyable experience of music, but also an educational one. And the access to instruments was another one. The cost of live performance was another issue. Barriers that we can actually address. And you are doing that every day through Kumba and Monterey Jazz Festival, through SFJAZZ, and Susan through California Jazz Conservatory. Thank you so much for sharing this. We could go on for another half hour, but we've come to the end of our time. Tim Jackson, Artistic Director of Monterey Jazz Festival and Kumba. Susan Muscarella, President of California Jazz Conservatory, and Randall Kline, Founder and Executive Artistic Director of SFJAZZ. You have made my life better just by helping me to understand your world and by also presenting music that is just so wonderful that I enjoy. Thank you so much. Please thank your staffs, your boards, your donors, your audiences, and most of all, as Randall says, as Tim says, as Susan says, the artists who we need to all support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.